We are at the beginning of a tale of two cities. Uh, the first is a dream, is a place where humankind has compromised its borders on the basis of principle of their human likeness and human needs. A city that has a robust space program. I mean, well, now you don't have to pay for tanks, so let's pay for some. You don't have to pay for aggressive military rockets. So let's pay for some rockets that uh, go directly to alleviate any um, given physical, elemental, environmental, elemental crisis um, that mankind faces from time to time, from place to place. Give natural disasters, they can be mitigated. Their injury can be mitigated by modern technique and industrial, agro-industrial technique. A city that is integrated into the humankind's effort altogether to accomplish the Gateway Lunar to Mars mission, otherwise known as coming from the Artemis generation. Artemis being this new revival of the NASA program that is on the books. It's ready to go. It needs to be funded, like as always, has usually been the problem. But the enthusiasm that was lacking before can be that extra special push for us to realize as a society that this is what we want. This is what we want to pay for. Not the tanks, but not the aggressive missiles, but the rockets that shoot up instruments and amazing inventions of human ingenuity, from satellites to space stations to landers to rovers to robotics of all kinds that can relay data. They won't replace the scientists, they'll relay the data to the scientists, and the scientists will figure out a little bit something more than they knew before. Not simply from the data, but from looking at all the data together and figuring out things like what you hear about when you talk to farmers in modern agriculture, how GPS from outer space plays a critical role in things like knowing when and where to plant, when and where and what to water which places at what times. But it goes way beyond that. I guess the saying is the old NASA program paid essentially 1,000% profit. I mean, for every dollar you get $10 back, and not categorically measurable in a sense that there is that, again, trickle down way of how scientific principles are discovered and communicated and brought into the practical application in the machine tool sector, which are machines that create machines, so that the end product machines that are doing a lot of the work are given new strength and power, um, power to create, to be that end process of creation, to power to accomplish tasks that otherwise were either took more human input, labor, physical time away from leisure, art, and science, or is not even possible at all. Um, it takes away. So, uh, the new, so that's the potential of, that's the tale, that's half the tale. That's one city that has uh, exploded in a renaissance of human culture, from practical economics to what is behind practical economics, which is the driver of practical economics, which is the human curiosity experimenting on hitherto known as anomalies, which really are gateways into profound discoveries of why something didn't make sense before, but now, okay, we compensated for it with a reason that makes sense, that can account for all of the so-called anomalies and regular stuff that wasn't, that the new platform can see it all. From the new platform, you look down and you see a system that has grown. It's not perfect, but it's grown, and it has, and the most exciting parts are the frontiers. So, I mean, get at it, you know. It's one city, and you have another city, which I must confess is not much of a city. Um, it is more of a village, or maybe I don't know if they'll still have castles, but Stafford castles, but you know, at least some large buildings that house some hereditary claim to not just the land around, but the people. The city will be defined by an environment, a community of primitive villages, feudal villages that have found the only way that they can control the chaos that had been brought upon them is to go straight Hobbesian and impose a kind of tyrannical rule from on the lands for which they're responsible and they find themselves privileged to have. But also, you know, it's their duty, and we can make poetry about the white man's burden and all these things. But this city, these villages, I mean, their space program, which they could still have, it's not something to laugh about. You know, it's pretty important. They can still look at the stars and navigate, and maybe have some boats and stuff that can. Even that again goes back to the principle of minimizing human caloric input into a system, mechanical or otherwise, that produces work. I'm talking about, you know, when I'm talking about this, I'm always talking about the alleviation, the perfecting of mankind leads to the minimization of human physical brute labor, and not that they'll be out of the job. It's not some Luddite problem, but that they will be the number one targets for investment valued investment society values these people. Everyone. We have this spark. If we're not using this spark for creativity, or at least even physically, brutally, maybe sometimes brutally, building through a canal that takes a lot of hard work, physical oxen type of work, but you get it done because you know that once the brute work is done, then it, the the classic situation of you're caring about your kids and their future, that they won't have to do that brute work, that they will have that navigation process already in play, which is the new Silk Road, the 21st, this new millennia that uh, benefits from having a lot of advances in, again, freeing man, the average condition of common men and women, from not so entertaining as a human being, the type of work, sometimes called stoop labor, sometimes brute in other ways. I mean, our job is to free people to, the people, all of them. That's why we're on this mission to get rid of poverty worldwide, to extinct it, like a species, like a parasitical species, to extinct the malnutrition of massive parts, or even itty bitty parts of mankind, is unacceptable. The second city, villages, feudal stuff are not only not concerned with that, they are concerned with that, because they see the other city, the first city, and it's a bit scary because the second city's rulers no longer have some kind of celebrity status of hereditary pretense. It's but what's so scary about looking into your own humanity? What makes you human is not how much gold you have more than the other person. It is about the pursuit of happiness. It is that common philosophy, that word that keeps popping up in the late 1800s, early, that happiness is was specifically actually chosen over property. The silly thing of Locke that we can talk about later, but happiness. That the second city, that is just a confederation of country club feudal lords that are terrified of their own humanity, because if they discover why they're actually here, what makes them immortal is not how much gold they leave behind, it's the treasure of the ideas they leave behind. And you'll know the treasure because it frees man and woman from, and children. We want to talk about disgusting, but child labor that we depend on, frees them from their, more so and more so, from the physical toil that is required to become the stewards of. And let's free the oxen too. Why not? Let's trust robotics a step further and say that man and man and woman, they figure out a way to be the stewards of these robotics that replace their own physical torment. and there'll be more than enough. The whole classroom. It will be a whole classroom per machine. I mean, don't worry. We can afford it. If society wants, wants to grow, it's fine. We can, because of all that extra output created in this sort of micro system of technology introduced through the harnessing of perhaps you might say less tangible universal physical principles that are discovered by that beautiful process of hypothesis, of paradox, of hypothesis, of experimentation, of theorizing the reason for it all, and finding those frontiers of that new platform discovered. And again, you're attempting this hypothesizing, the higher hypothesis. You're constantly involved in the intellectual upgrade that not only you will experience as an individual, but the true, and you might falter as an individual if it gets stuck with you. The torment of someone who has a beautiful idea, who is left alone with it and with no one to share and love with it. And so it is a social process where ideas are exchanged, and you notice that all humanity can do this, aside from certain bad neurological problems or whatever. But this is a humanity species distinct, not just distinct, but in a way that is self-conscious, that can overcome the hyperbolic human population growth with an even more, I'm not sure even more, but with an appropriate corresponding hyperbolic growth in our access to resources, both natural and synthetic, because they are, even the synthetic themselves, produced by a practical machine, which was produced by an idea captured by a bigger machine put into this little machine. So it all adds up. And need I remind us that art and music and science like this, like the way that music helps you organize your mind, is a lot of the way that I was describing the scientific process, the Platonic process of paradox, hypothesis, experimentation, discovering a new, a higher hypothesis, a new idea that solves it, but really itself is a higher hypothesis as you look at the fringes of its own frontiers. But that feudalism has no room for economic feudalism, cultural feudalism, pessimism has no room for the average, for everyone, not the average, but everyone, has no room for everyone to discover their own dignity as being able to play with fire, being like atomic fire. Every human being born can do this, if only given the chance. If only we give them that chance. We give ourselves the chance. It's the great equalizer of humanity right now. We're at a tale of two cities. The same city in the future. Two potentials. Which city will we choose to live in? The one that is defined by over 140, I don't know what it is, countries around the world, nations that are benefiting from China's offer to the world, including us, of physically building the world so that we can again, as a society, choose art and artists and stewards of machines, not machines themselves. Human beings are not beasts or machines. We are stewards of these things. Do we want a city like that, which China is offering, and all these countries have not agreed with China, but have seen their own benefit as a win-win situation, as the only situation outside of the other city. Let's look at the other city of modernity. What modernity has given us as a Western, so-called Western civilization, pure and absolute bankruptcy. I mean, don't ask me, ask the corporate debt bubble, ask the bubble of this, ask the bubble of that. All associated with the City of London's usurpation, recolonization of the American colonies through creating money, through derivatives, through I promise I'll give you all this. And if you promise you'll give me all that, and if you promise you give me all that, and I promise you'll give me all this, and all of a sudden we're all having this huge pyramid of promises of higher and higher wealth. Meanwhile, the things, the instruments, the physical assets that are underneath and controlled and owned by this crazy promise, after promise, is being sucked dry to feed not the health of the company, but the shareholders a little bit, not much, if anything, but really the CEO freaking salaries. Give me a break. How much are these guys worth, really? One guy does the work of 500 or 1,000 or whatever, however you want to define the ratio of salary to actual worker. You don't have to be a communist to know that this is un-American. So that's the city. So we live in two cities today. And they were once two possibilities. This one city, but there were two possibilities, and we got something good here, even though something terrible, like I just said, controls quadrillions of crisis debt around the world. But the other city that's ongoing really is not Beijing, it's not China, it is a world land bridge policy called the New Silk Road. The old Silk Road that stretched its arms to each other, in certain ways imperfect, in certain ways perfecting. But the New Silk Road is transparency of at its finest. You want to complain about Chinese capital from the government? I mean, at least that has a paper trail. You're talking about comparing that to the Cayman Island digital or whatever, all the British offshore funny money, black market, drugs, guns, prostitution, human trafficking ad nauseam. They're two cities. There's one city that we live in now, and there's one city that we will live in the future. The two cities that I'm talking about are potentials. And as human beings, we do have the potential to choose, not our personal destiny. Maybe an accident happens and whatnot, but we can be part together of choosing a dream, Martin Luther King's dream, in a sense, extended into its economic implications of poverty. Is at the tip of our fingertips. Poverty can be a thing of the past, as long as we don't make mankind a thing of the past by blowing it up, by keeping some people like Bolton and Pompeo and on and on, the chicken hawks, the war hawks, the people who the military-industrial complex. Trump's the most powerful man in the world, free world, you might say. But he is absolutely 100% dependent on us to do the right thing.